They told him the elephant had changed, that after all these years, it might not even remember who he was. The morning air at the sanctuary hung heavy with silence as Michael Carter stood at the edge of the enclosure, his hands trembling slightly at his sides, his eyes locked on the massive figure in the distance. A figure he hadn't seen in nearly 4 decades. A figure that had once followed him like a shadow when it was no bigger than a small car tire. Back when life felt simpler and the bond between them felt unbreakable. But time has a way of rewriting stories, and today, no one, not even Michael, knew how this one would end. The staff had warned him before he stepped out there, their voices careful but firm, telling him that Charlie wasn't the same anymore, that years of separation, relocation, and life in different environments had made him distant, unpredictable even, not dangerous, but not the affectionate young elephant Michael once knew either. And as Michael took a slow step forward onto the dry, sunlit dirt, every crunch beneath his boots seemed louder than it should have been. Like the world itself was holding its breath, watching, waiting, judging what would happen next. Charlie stood nearly 100 feet away, his massive frame still, his ears barely moving in the warm breeze. His presence alone commanding enough to make anyone hesitate. And yet Michael couldn't look away, because in his mind, he wasn't seeing the full-grown elephant in front of him. He was seeing the calf who used to nudge his side for attention, the one who used to wrap his tiny trunk around Michael's arm like it was the safest place in the world. But memory can be cruel like that. It shows you what was, not what is, and right now, what is felt uncertain, tense, almost fragile. A few more steps forward. That's all Michael dared to take, stopping just short of the invisible line the staff had advised him not to cross, his heart pounding harder with each second that passed without movement, without recognition, without anything. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, Charlie shifted his weight, his head tilting just slightly, his eyes focusing, locking onto Michael in a way that sent a quiet ripple through the small group watching from a safe distance. No one spoke, no one moved, because this was the moment where everything could either fall apart or become something no one would ever forget. Michael swallowed hard. His voice caught somewhere between hope and fear, unsure if he should call out, unsure if that would help or only make things worse. Because what if the connection they once had was gone? What if to Charlie, he was just another stranger standing too close, expecting something that no longer existed? And yet, despite every warning, every doubt, every passing year that should have erased what they once shared, Michael took one final step forward, his breath shallow, his chest tight, his entire world narrowed down to the distance between him and the elephant that once knew him better than anyone else ever had. And for a moment, nothing happened at all. The stillness stretched longer than anyone expected, and in that silence Michael felt the weight of every year that had passed pressing down on him. 39 birthdays, 39 winters, 39 summers where life had moved forward without the one connection he never truly replaced. And as he stood there facing Charlie, memories began to surface not as distant flashes, but as vivid moments that felt close enough to touch. He remembered the first day he saw the young elephant, barely able to stand steadily on his feet, his skin wrinkled and soft, his eyes wide with uncertainty. It had been early morning back then too, the air cool and quiet as the sanctuary team worked carefully to help the orphaned calf settle in. And while others kept their distance, unsure of how the young animal would react, Michael had stepped forward without hesitation, kneeling down slowly, speaking in a calm, steady voice that carried more warmth than words. And something about that moment had changed everything, because instead of backing away, the tiny elephant had taken a hesitant step closer, reaching out with his trunk, as if searching for something familiar in a world that had suddenly become too large and too uncertain. From that day on, they were rarely apart. Mornings would begin with Charlie following Michael across the grounds, his small feet kicking up dust as he tried to keep pace, sometimes stumbling but always getting back up, always determined. And Michael would laugh softly, turning back to wait, placing a gentle hand against Charlie's forehead in a quiet gesture that became their routine. Afternoons were filled with simple things, guiding him to water, showing him where to find shade, speaking to him constantly, as if the elephant understood every word, and maybe in some way he did, because Charlie responded not just with instinct, but with something deeper, something that felt like trust. And over time, that trust grew into something stronger, a bond that everyone around them noticed, but could not fully explain. The other staff would often say that Charlie acted differently when Michael was near, calmer, more attentive, as if the presence of one human had become an anchor in his world. And yet even bonds like that are not immune to change, because as the sanctuary expanded and resources shifted, difficult decisions had to be made. And one of those decisions meant relocating Charlie to another reserve, one that could better support him as he grew larger and more independent. Michael remembered that day with a clarity that never faded. The trucks arriving, the careful preparation, the quiet tension in the air as everyone moved with purpose but avoided eye contact, because no one wanted to acknowledge what it meant. And when the moment came, when Charlie was guided toward the transport, he had resisted not with aggression but with confusion, turning his head repeatedly toward Michael, making low, uncertain sounds that echoed in the still air. And Michael had stood there, unable to step forward, unable to stop what was already set in motion, whispering softly even as the distance between them grew, hoping somehow that the sound of his voice would stay with Charlie long after he was gone. And now, standing here again after all those years, with that same elephant just yards away, Michael wondered if any part of that connection had survived the passage of time, or if it had been left behind on that day, carried away with the dust and the silence that followed. The memory faded as quickly as it had come, and Michael found himself pulled back into the present, his eyes still locked on Charlie, searching for even the smallest sign that something from those years still remained. But the distance between them felt heavier now, not measured in feet, but in time, in everything that had happened in between. Charlie stood unmoving, his massive form steady against the golden light of the morning, and for a long moment it seemed as though nothing would change, as though the past would stay exactly where it belonged, out of reach, untouchable. And slowly, almost painfully, doubt began to settle in, creeping into Michael's chest with a quiet weight. Maybe the staff had been right. Maybe time had done what it always does, slowly erasing the details, softening the edges, turning something once strong into something distant and unrecognizable. Michael exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just slightly as the reality of that possibility began to take shape. He had prepared himself for this, or at least he thought he had, telling himself on the long flight over that it was enough just to see Charlie again, that recognition was not guaranteed, that expecting it would only lead to disappointment. But standing here now, face to face with the past, those careful expectations felt fragile, almost impossible to hold on to, because a part of him had always believed that what they shared was different, something deeper than memory alone, something that could survive distance and time. And yet Charlie remained still, his gaze steady but unreadable, offering nothing to confirm or deny what Michael so desperately hoped for. The air felt thicker now, the quiet stretching into something almost unbearable, and behind him, the staff exchanged subtle glances, their expressions cautious, measured, as if they were already preparing for the moment to end without anything happening at all. One of them shifted slightly, ready to step in if needed, but still holding back, giving the moment just a little more time. And then, without warning, Charlie took a step forward, slow and deliberate, the ground beneath him pressing down with a soft, heavy sound that echoed more than it should have in the silence. Michael froze instinctively, his breath catching as his heart began to race again, every instinct telling him to stay exactly where he was, to not make any sudden movement, to not break whatever fragile thread had just formed between them. Another step followed, then another, each one closing the distance inch by inch, and with every movement Charlie's presence grew larger, more overwhelming, not in a threatening way, but in a way that reminded everyone watching just how powerful he truly was. And yet there was something else in the way he moved, something subtle, something that did not match the warnings Michael had been given. His pace was not aggressive, not hurried, but careful, almost measured, as if each step was being chosen rather than driven by instinct. And still, Michael did not move. He could not, because whatever was happening now felt too important, too delicate to risk interrupting. The distance between them shrinking until it was no longer something that could be ignored. And for the first time since Michael had arrived, it felt like the moment they had all been waiting for was finally beginning to unfold. But whether it would lead to recognition or something entirely different, No one could yet say. Charlie continued forward until the distance between them was no more than 20 feet. Close enough now that Michael could see the fine details he had once known so well, the texture of his skin, the slow rhythm of his breathing, the way his ears shifted slightly with each passing second. And yet there was still no clear sign of recognition, no sudden change, no immediate reaction that confirmed what Michael had been hoping for. Instead, there was only this quiet, heavy tension that seemed to press down on everyone watching, making even the smallest movement feel amplified. And behind Michael, one of the staff members took a cautious step forward, lowering their voice as they called out softly, reminding him to stay calm, to avoid sudden gestures, because even a familiar animal can respond unpredictably after so many years. And Michael nodded almost imperceptibly, though his eyes never left Charlie, because in that moment, nothing else mattered, not the warnings, not the years, not even the outcome. Only the connection he was desperately searching for. Charlie stopped again, his massive frame now towering just a short distance away. And for a moment it felt as though time had frozen completely, the world narrowing down to the space between man and animal, past and present, memory and reality. And then something shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that immediately gave answers, but subtly, almost quietly. Charlie lowered his head just slightly, his trunk lifting a few inches from the ground, hovering in the air as if sensing something beyond sight, beyond sound. And Michael felt his breath catch in his chest, because he recognized that movement. It was not aggressive, not defensive. It was searching, the same way Charlie used to reach out when he was young, trying to understand the world around him, trying to connect, but doubt still lingered, because memory can deceive, and hope can make even the smallest gesture feel larger than it truly is. Charlie took another slow step forward, closing the gap to less than 10 feet now, and the air between them seemed to hum with something unspoken, something fragile. Michael's hands tightened slightly at his sides, every instinct pulling him in opposite directions, part of him wanting to step forward, to close the distance himself, to call out, to reach out, to force the moment into something certain. But another part holding him back, knowing that this had to come from Charlie, that anything rushed could break whatever delicate thread was forming. And so he stayed still, his voice silent, his presence steady, offering nothing but patience. And then, without warning, Charlie lifted his trunk higher, the movement slow but unmistakable, rising above his head in a way that instantly shifted the energy of the moment. A ripple of concern passing through the staff behind Michael as they tensed, ready to intervene if necessary, because from a distance, the gesture could be misread, could be seen as something more forceful, something more unpredictable. And Michael felt that tension too, felt the weight of every eye watching, every breath held, every second stretching longer than it should. But he did not move, he did not step back, because deep down, beneath the fear, beneath the uncertainty, there was something else, something quieter but stronger, a belief that this moment was not what it appeared to be, that what looked like danger might be something entirely different. And as Charlie's trunk hovered in the air, suspended between them, the entire world seemed to wait for what would happen next. For a brief second that felt like it stretched far beyond time itself, nothing moved. Charlie's trunk remained raised in the air, suspended between instinct and intention, and every person watching could feel the tension tightening, like a held breath that no one dared release. Michael could hear his own heartbeat now, loud and steady in his ears, each pulse reminding him how fragile this moment was, how easily it could shift in a direction no one wanted. And yet, beneath that pressure, there was something else, something quieter, something familiar. Charlie's trunk did not swing or snap or move with force. Instead it hovered, wavering slightly as if searching through the air, tracing something invisible. And Michael felt it then, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, something that did not match fear, something that felt closer to recognition. Charlie took one more step forward, closing the distance to just a few feet, close enough now that Michael could feel the warmth of his presence. The sheer size of him no longer abstract but real, overwhelming in scale yet strangely gentle in its stillness. The staff behind him shifted again, more urgently this time, one of them raising a hand slightly, as if preparing to call out. But still they hesitated, because even they could sense that something important was unfolding, something that could not be interrupted without consequence. And Michael, standing there with every muscle tense yet unmoving, made a choice in that moment. He slowly lifted one hand, not in a sudden motion, not in a way that would startle, but carefully, deliberately, the same way he had done years ago when Charlie was just a calf learning to trust. His palm open, his fingers relaxed, offering nothing but presence, nothing but familiarity. And for a brief instant, doubts surged again. What if this meant nothing now? What if the gesture that once meant comfort was now meaningless, lost to time? But he held it there anyway, steady, patient, letting the silence carry the weight of everything he could not say. Charlie's trunk lowered slightly, the movement slow, controlled, and as it descended, it did not rush forward. It did not strike or push. It paused just inches away from Michael's hand, so close that the space between them felt charged, alive with possibility. Michael could feel the air shift against his skin, the faintest brush of movement that sent a quiet shiver through him. And then, almost imperceptibly, Charlie's trunk moved closer, closing that final gap with a softness that no one had expected. The contact was light, barely there, a gentle touch against Michael's hand. And in that instant, something changed, not in a dramatic burst, not in a sudden display, but in a way that was deeper, quieter, undeniable, because that touch was not random, it was not uncertain, it was precise, familiar, the exact same way Charlie used to reach for him all those years ago. And Michael felt it immediately, the recognition not in his mind but in his chest, a wave of emotion rising so quickly he could barely contain it, his breath catching as his fingers trembled slightly against the massive yet careful presence before him. And behind him, the staff stood frozen, their earlier tension replaced by something else entirely, something closer to disbelief, because what they were witnessing was no longer uncertain, it was no longer a question of what might happen, it was the beginning of something none of them had truly expected to see. The moment the contact was made, the world seemed to shift in a way no one could have predicted. Charlie did not pull away, did not hesitate. Instead, his trunk lingered against Michael's hand, the gentle pressure increasing ever so slightly, as if confirming something long buried but never truly lost. And then, in a movement that carried both strength and unmistakable intention, Charlie slowly slid his trunk upward along Michael's arm, tracing a path that felt deliberate, familiar, almost rehearsed, as though this was not the first time he had done it, but simply the first time in many years. And Michael's breath caught again, this time not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization of what was happening. Because this was no coincidence, no random gesture. This was recognition, pure and undeniable. The kind that does not rely on memory alone, but on something deeper, something instinctive, something that time cannot fully erase. Charlie let out a low, resonant rumble, a sound so deep it seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. And for a moment Michael closed his eyes, because he knew that sound. He had heard it countless times before, years ago when Charlie was small and unsure, when that same rumble meant comfort, meant trust, meant connection, and hearing it now, after everything that had passed, was almost too much to process. His knees weakened slightly as emotions surged through him, and without thinking, he stepped forward, closing the final inches between them, his other hand rising instinctively to rest against Charlie's trunk, his fingers pressing gently into the warm, textured skin. And this time, Charlie responded immediately, curling his trunk slightly around Michael's arm, not tightly, not forcefully, but with a careful precision that spoke volumes, as if he understood exactly how much pressure to use, exactly how to hold without overwhelming. And behind them, the staff stood in stunned silence, their earlier concern replaced by awe, because what they were witnessing was no longer uncertain, it was no longer a fragile possibility, it was a full, undeniable reunion unfolding in front of them, something rare, something deeply moving, something that defied the quiet assumptions they had made about time and memory. Charlie shifted his massive body closer, his head lowering slightly as he leaned in, closing the space between them even further, and Michael could no longer hold back. A quiet sob escaped him, raw and unfiltered, the kind of emotion that builds over years and finally finds a way out, his hand moving gently along Charlie's trunk, then up toward his face, touching him the way he used to, the way that once meant everything. And Charlie responded again, his trunk moving higher, wrapping more securely now, pulling Michael closer in a gesture that could only be described as an embrace, slow, deliberate, filled with a kind of awareness that made it impossible to dismiss as instinct alone. And as Michael leaned into that contact, his forehead resting briefly against Charlie, the years between them seemed to dissolve completely, replaced by something simple and powerful, a bond that had endured in silence, waiting for this exact moment to surface again. And all around them, no one spoke, because there were no words that could capture what was happening. Only the quiet understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that proved that even after decades apart, some connections are never truly broken. Michael could no longer hold himself together. The moment Charlie's trunk wrapped around him with that unmistakable familiarity, something deep inside him broke open. Years of quiet longing, unanswered questions, and memories he had carried alone all came rushing to the surface at once, and he let out a trembling breath that turned into a soft, uncontrollable sob, his shoulders shaking as he pressed closer, his hands gripping gently against Charlie's trunk as if anchoring himself to something real, something he had feared might no longer exist. And Charlie did not pull away, did not shift uncomfortably. Instead, he remained steady, present, his massive form still and grounded, as if understanding exactly what Michael needed in that moment. The low rumble returned again, deeper this time, more sustained, vibrating through the air like a quiet reassurance, and Michael closed his eyes, letting that sound wash over him. Because it was the same sound he remembered from long ago, the same gentle expression of connection that had once made him feel like he was not alone in the world, and now, after everything, it was still there, unchanged in the ways that mattered most. Behind them, the staff stood frozen, not out of caution anymore, but out of pure emotion, some of them exchanging glances filled with disbelief, others quietly wiping at their eyes, because what they were witnessing was something few people ever get to see, not just an animal responding to a familiar presence, but something far deeper, something that felt almost human in its awareness, its intention, its ability to hold on to a bond that should have faded with time. One of the younger staff members took a slow step forward, lowering their voice as they spoke softly to a colleague, unable to hide the amazement in their tone. But even their quiet words seemed out of place in the presence of what was unfolding, because this was not something that needed explanation. It was something that needed to be felt. Michael slowly pulled back just enough to look at Charlie, his eyes filled with tears, his expression a mix of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. And for a moment, he simply stood there, taking it all in, the size of him, the warmth of him, the undeniable presence of something that had never truly disappeared. His hand moved gently along Charlie's trunk, then up toward his face, tracing the lines and contours he had once known so well. And Charlie responded by lowering his head further, leaning into the touch in a way that felt both familiar and deeply intentional, as if inviting it, as if remembering it. And that was the moment Michael realized this was not just recognition. This was memory alive in its purest form, not stored in words or thoughts, but in feeling, in instinct, in the quiet language they had once shared without needing to speak. His voice finally found its way out, soft and unsteady as he whispered Charlie's name, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for it to exist in the space between them. And Charlie reacted instantly, his ears shifting, his trunk tightening slightly in response, a clear and immediate acknowledgement that sent another wave of emotion through Michael, because it was proof, undeniable proof that despite everything, despite the years and the distance and the changes, Charlie still knew him, still remembered. And as the reality of that settled in, Michael let out a quiet laugh through his tears, the kind that comes when something feels almost too incredible to believe. And all around them, the world seemed to soften, the tension completely gone now, replaced by something warm, something gentle, something that stayed long after the moment itself began to settle into memory. The moment did not end quickly. It did not fade the way ordinary moments do. Instead, it stretched, deepened, becoming something fuller with every passing second. Charlie remained close, his trunk still gently wrapped around Michael's arm, as if unwilling to let go, as if afraid that if he did, the connection might slip away again. And Michael, still overwhelmed, let himself stay there. No longer thinking about time or distance or anything beyond what he was feeling right now, his hand moving, slowly, almost instinctively, along Charlie's trunk, then up toward his cheek, his fingers tracing the familiar warmth of his skin, and Charlie responded by leaning in further, his massive head lowering just enough to meet the touch, his eyes soft, calm, completely present, and there was something in that stillness that spoke louder than anything else. Something that did not need explanation, because it was clear in the way Charlie stayed, in the way he adjusted his weight slightly to remain close, careful not to overwhelm, careful not to break the moment. And Michael let out another quiet breath, steadier this time, his emotions still strong but no longer chaotic, replaced by something gentler, something that felt like peace, like something long lost finally being returned. The staff, who had once stood ready to step in, now watched with a different kind of attention, not alert, not cautious, but respectful, almost reverent, as though they understood they were witnessing something rare enough to deserve silence. One of them quietly lowered the camera they had been holding, realizing that no recording could truly capture what this felt like, because this was not just a reunion, it was a restoration, something that went beyond what anyone had expected. Charlie let out another low rumble, softer now, almost like a contented sigh, and as the sound lingered in the air, he slowly shifted his trunk, not pulling away completely, but repositioning it, gently brushing it across Michael's shoulder, then resting it there for a moment, a gesture so deliberate and careful that it felt almost protective, and Michael smiled through the last of his tears, a quiet, genuine smile that carried more meaning than words ever could, because in that simple movement, he understood something he had not fully allowed himself to believe until now. This was not just recognition of a person. This was recognition of a bond, something that had been formed in trust and care and had endured without needing constant presence to survive. Michael took a small step forward, no longer hesitant, no longer uncertain, closing whatever space remained between them, his hand resting gently against Charlie's face. And for a while, they simply stayed like that, not moving, not speaking, just sharing the space, the silence, the connection that had found its way back despite everything. And in that stillness, the years that once felt so heavy no longer seemed to matter, because what remained was something stronger than time, something that could not be measured or explained, only felt. And as the morning light continued to rise around them, warming the ground beneath their feet, it became clear to everyone watching that this was no longer just a moment. It was something that would stay with them, something they would carry long after the day ended, because they had just witnessed what happens when a connection is never truly forgotten. As the moment slowly settled into something quieter, something more grounded, Michael finally stepped back just enough to take in the full presence of Charlie once more, his hand still resting gently against the elephant's face, his breathing steadier now, but his eyes still filled with the kind of emotion that does not disappear quickly. And Charlie, instead of pulling away or turning back toward the open space of the sanctuary, remained where he was, his body angled toward Michael, his attention unwavering, as if the connection between them had not only returned but re-established itself with a quiet certainty. And in that stillness, something became undeniably clear. This was not a fleeting reaction, not a moment driven by curiosity or coincidence. This was something deeper, something that had endured in ways no one could fully explain. Michael let out a soft breath, his voice barely above a whisper as he spoke again, not expecting a response in words, but knowing now that he did not need one, because everything he needed to understand was already there in the way Charlie stayed close, in the way his trunk would occasionally shift just enough to maintain contact, as if making sure the connection was still real, still present, and behind them, the staff slowly began to relax, their posture easing as the tension that once filled the air had completely dissolved, replaced by a quiet sense of awe that lingered in the space around them. Some of them exchanging small, knowing smiles, others simply watching in silence, aware that they had just witnessed something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives, something that challenged what they thought they knew about memory, about time, about the limits of connection. Michael finally lowered his hand, though not fully breaking contact, his fingers brushing lightly along Charlie's trunk one last time before letting it rest at his side. And even then, Charlie did not immediately move away. Instead, he stood there for a few more seconds, his presence calm, grounded, almost thoughtful, before slowly lifting his head and releasing a soft, low rumble that seemed to echo gently through the open space, a sound that felt less like a call and more like a quiet acknowledgement. And as Michael stepped back another small distance, giving Charlie room, there was no sense of loss in the movement, no fear that the connection would fade again, because what had just been shared was not something that could disappear so easily. It had already proven that it could survive years of separation, changes in environment, and the quiet passage of time. And as Charlie finally turned slightly, not to leave completely, but to resume his place within the sanctuary, he paused once more, glancing back in a way that felt intentional, a final, silent recognition that did not need to be explained. And Michael smiled softly, no longer overwhelmed, no longer